I'm your host, Marc Champagne, and it is my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game, personally and professionally. Today I'm speaking with Shaahin, who is the creator of herbal ecstasy, the nootropic pill that sparked the 100% legal smart drug movement. He made millions, but what made it special was that he was only 15 years old at the time. That's a serious entrepreneur there. His career as a serial entrepreneur spans more than 30 years and $1 billion in revenue. This one's going to be fun because I've been jamming on your book the last few nights, and there's a hell of a story there and lots of lessons to be learned. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. I appreciate that.
Before we get into the story and everything that surrounds you, I start the show off same question for every guest, just to avoid any type of job titles and whatnot. And that's just, who are you? As we speak today, who are you?
So I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a family man. I have a beautiful wife and a beautiful 7-year-old son as we speak. He'll be 8 years old soon.
Hmm.
And my life has been spent spotting trends and developing physical products and companies that impact people, particularly in health and wellness. But I was one of the forerunners in the nootropic movement that really popped up in the 1990s. And then I was one of the first people to popularize digital vaporization, patented all the technology that now when we see vapes came out of. And then from there, I went on to become an Amazon expert. And what I do now is I coach and train people how to sell products on Amazon.
Love it. Love it. I mean, speaking of your family, I read the dedication to your book, which I'd love to ask about, because you said, may we live an extraordinary life and make a dent in the universe together, which is a beautiful line, by the way. I'd just love to know for you, what is an extraordinary life?
I think it comes down to mainly one thing, and that's freedom. The absolute greatest thing. I know right now, especially during COVID and all the stuff politically that's going on in the world, people talk about freedom. But what I like to think of an extraordinary life is one where you have the absolute freedom to do what you want with who you want, when you want. And yes, it does require that you have some level of fuck you money. You do need to have financial freedom. Anybody who tells you you don't is lying to you. Those days are long over. And we live in a society where life is made a lot easier with money. So for me, it is having the financial freedom to be able to say, fuck you, whenever I want to whoever I want, to deals that I don't want, and to be able to be open to more opportunities that align with whatever it is that I'm interested in. I know that you and I talk a lot, or we have talked a lot about Stephen Kotler and his work and his last book, Art of the Impossible, which is fantastic. And interestingly enough, in that book, one of the things that he talks about is following your fascination, just fucking going out there and exploring something that you're interested in that doesn't have anything to do with making money. And that's actually, most people don't know that, where, they say, oh, he's a gentleman and a scholar. Where that came from, it came from the fact that people who had wealth, private wealth, personal wealth, family wealth in those days had the ability to study. They had the ability to follow their fascination and live that life of freedom. So they said, oh, he's a gentleman and a scholar, which means dude's got enough money to do whatever the fuck he wants. And that's ultimately the freedom that I think leads to an extraordinary life.
Love it. Love it. Well, and what I've noticed too, I mean, it seems like freedom, to get to a place of freedom, however you define that for people listening, usually starts with some curiosity, and poking around, seeing what, makes sense for you. I'd love to dial it back, obviously, and just, if you can give the listeners a bit of a review. I mean, you've got a whole book on this, so obviously there's, there's quite the history, but if you could, there it is. If you could just give a quick summary of, like, how the hell did you get started in the world that you jumped into. And there's a line I have to share. There's a line in there at one point where I think I wrote it down. Yeah, where you had just made $1 billion, and you said something like, "I might actually need to get an accountant at this point." And
Yeah.
I was cracking up. Anyway, share a little bit about the backstory.
It's true. So I started when I was 15 years old. Prior to that, I had led a rather shaky adolescence coming to the United States during a revolution. We came here as refugees. My family was solid, poor, lower middle class. We managed to buy a home in an affluent community, up and coming affluent community, but the house was a wreck and we had to fix it up. And it was just a fluke, but it turned out that neighborhood was really booming. So I grew up around all this wealth and all these rich kids all around me. But we were like this poor Iranian family who had escaped Iran with basically the clothes on our backs. And my dad would work at a pizza shop. He'd had worked at a dry cleaners for 30 years. We didn't have new clothes. When we got clothes, it was when somebody walked into the dry cleaners and left it behind, and we would inherit those clothes. That would be what we would wear. So we would always be wishing, hey man, that guy looks cool. That's a surfer guy. I want surfer clothes. I hope he doesn't pay his fucking bill.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the kind of environment that I grew up in. It was very gritty. We'd get into fights all the time, physical altercations. By the time I was in my adolescence, I had started a little illicit products and services business within the school and realized very quickly that I was really fucking bad at crime. We would make a lot of money, very good at making money, very bad at crime. We would constantly get busted. And, we would go to the local liquor store, and I had a gang of other kids that were complete malcontents and mutants, just like I was. And we had a little kid who was a smaller, shorter, young guy, and he would sneak under the metal detectors and stuff his pants with all the contraband stuff. Okay. And be able to, and we would hawk it off at school and always end up in detention. So I knew that I was not good at crime. I needed to figure something else out. When I reached 15, I started looking around me and I saw all this wealth. I saw all these kids with credit cards and they got to eat out. I never ate at a freaking restaurant. They ate out all the time. They lived this like kind of free life, going on fantastic vacations. We went nowhere. We stayed in LA. Occasionally, my folks and I would drive up to Vegas and stay at a $20 hotel and come back. That would be our vacations. We did not have the kind of lifestyle that was going on around me. And I remember thinking to myself, dude, I want the fucking Benz and the hot wife and the hot girlfriend and the car and all that stuff. But it was not accessible to me. The path that had been drawn out for me was basically go to school for 12 years, 14 years, maybe become a doctor and then reach that success. So I said, fuck this, I'm burning my ships. And I bailed, cut all ties and went out there. I did have books at that time, Mark. I had Think and Grow Rich. I had all these great old-timey inspirational books. I had Tony Robbins and Wayne Dyer and all these personal development gurus that were coming up at that time. And I said, fuck it, I'm out. And I left.
Okay. And where did you go? Where did it go from there?
So I started off the first few nights sleeping on the beach. Yeah. Then I realized that there were places in the community college where I could kind of sneak in and figure out where to lay my head. And eventually I started figuring out that brokers, and LA was in a big building boom at that time.
Okay.
And I realized that the brokers had these codes, and it was the same code to get into every building. Now, in those days, there was a huge building boom. Big, fancy apartment buildings, condo complexes with dozens and dozens of units, and they were empty and a year out from being built or finished. So I would sneak in at night, put in the code, fall asleep in this luxury apartment. I had a sleeping bag, and wake up and leave by the mornings. And it's great, luxury housing, sorted. I would eat at little hot dog stands. I would eat, I was vegetarian at that time, terrible decision. And I would eat vegan, even worse. And I would have a hot dog bun, and I would put relish and ketchup in it, or a tortilla with ketchup and relish because it was free. And that was the stuff that I survived on. And sure enough, I managed to get myself a mentor, and I got involved in the rave scene, the electronic music scene, which was booming at the time, the EDM scene. All the great electronic music bands of the time were up. And I learned very quickly that nobody was making money in these clubs except for one type of person. Can you guess who it was?
Yeah, I can, I think.
Yeah. So it was the drug dealers.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, man, these guys they're dressed nice, they look good, they've got beautiful women around them, fast cars, they live in nice places. I'll just do that. That's great. And at this time, the drug ecstasy, MDMA, methyldioxymethamphetamine, Molly, whatever they call it these days, in those days had been huge, massive. It was all anybody wanted to do. One problem, which leads me to the right place at the right time, was that the supply had dried out. We're talking Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, just say no, all that stuff happening. And the supply, which a fairly difficult drug to synthesize, was mainly being made outside of the country, and they cut the flow. These drug dealers were left with no drugs. So I thought to myself in that moment, if I could create a natural version of ecstasy, something using those herbs that would be natural, organic, would have no negative effects, but could simulate a similar effect, man, I'd be in the money. Everybody would be buying it from me. So I did it. I managed to get myself a girlfriend at the time, despite my brokenness. I managed to get her to let me cook up prototypes in her kitchen while her dad, who was a superintendent of some school district or something, was out. Dude would go out the front door. I'd come in through the back. We'd be making prototypes and testing it on everybody that we could, until finally I came up with a formula that worked really well.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's that's love. Or that's something, right?
It's something. It's something.
I'm curious, just the story about punching in and essentially staying in these luxury apartments and spots and stuff like that, even though obviously you didn't own those places, but it kind of, it almost reminds me of you like some forced visualization there, especially since you're studying like the Tony Robbinses of the world and Think Grow and what is that?
Think and Grow Rich. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sitting right there, literally. Like a lot of their principles are around like what you think about is what you will attract and so forth, and then you need to take the actions and stuff. Was that at all coming into mind, or was that just pure survival mode for you?
That's a really good question. I think no one's ever asked me that before. Yeah, absolutely. And what's even funnier is I had two choices of places to stay in those days. One were these like abandoned, or not abandoned, but these under construction luxury places, because if you went to the lower level ones, they probably had a security guard. The luxury ones, they just didn't expect anybody would ever mess with them. So they were wide open. So the higher up you went, the better it was. Sometimes you didn't have running water or electricity, but it was fine. And yeah, I was in there. I was constantly telling myself, while I was reading these books with a flashlight or whatever, that one day I will have this. The second option I had was a 1966 Lincoln Continental with the suicide doors. This was one of the ultimate luxury cars of its time, one of the great American cars, I think still to this day. Sure. I sold my last one a little while back from my collection, but they're spectacular cars. And so being in this car, you kind of also got that similar sense of that glamour and that excellence that was American car making in the 1960s. And similar to what one of my mentors, this guy named Stuart Wilde, who wrote this book called The Trick to Money is Having Some, and he was a British author who I befriended sometime later along the way, and we became pretty tight, would always teach us that there is something to be said to faking it until you make it. So fake it until you make it. But not only that everything has an energy. This falls into the strong category of woo-woo, but I love it. 80s woo-woo. Yeah. And that if you can't afford a Ferrari, walk into the dealership, smell the leather, see what the engine sounds like, really have a sense of what that thing is like. Feel what winning feels like to you, and you
Yeah.
will be that much closer to it. So for me, all this was leading me to that. And at that time, yeah, I was reading all that stuff. I was reading affirmations. I was reading Think and Grow Rich. I was reading Og Mandino, The Greatest Salesman. I had my goals and my ambitions written down, and I had lists of things that I would read out every day. And my environment, like you said, interestingly enough, in a subtle way, constantly was a reaffirmation, either that I would become successful and go beyond the limitations that I had at that time, or that one day I could achieve all that was around me.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing with the woo-woo stuff. I firmly believe the combination of, I'll stick with the term woo-woo and action is a winning formula. I mean, you start. I've interviewed, like yourself, tons of different people, and there's an Olympic athlete that comes to mind, Apollo Ono. I mean, he used to make himself sweat, meditating, visualizing his speed skating races. I mean, we all hear those stories, right? Visualizing the downhill ski run or the run and this and that. But as soon as you flip it into any other context, it becomes this weird, like, oh, you're just telling yourself these things and whatnot. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't know. I mean, I've seen this stuff play out over and over again. It's stuff that I read as well in practice, and it's powerful.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm a science-based guy. I believe in science. I believe in critical thought. I believe in logical fallacies and how we can get around that stuff. And I don't believe in wacky things like cosmology and psychic abilities and those kinds of things. With that said, science is not faultless. It is not flawless.
Yeah.
And what I've come to, and I've thought a lot about this, and look, I'm a big fan of Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and all those guys. Let me turn that sound off here so our conversation will be uninterrupted. I apologize. So this is what I've come down to. Science works best when you are looking for a truth that will work for the majority of people or all people, that is an undisputed truth until it is challenged somewhere down along the line.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the best thing for you and me. Why? This is why. It's the reality distortion field.
Sure.
Not only is it what Walter Isaacson wrote in his book about Steve Jobs, how Steve Jobs would have this reality distortion field where reality would be questioned by the people around him and somehow it would make it work, but more so because things that may be woo-woo, things that may have no basis in science, could work potentially for one person. And if that one person is you would be better served following that woo-woo fucking whatever thing is than the science.
Yeah. Yeah,
and we're seeing more and more of this every day, as we're seeing placebo shockingly have its efficacy. If you look at the chart of placebo versus actual drug, and you see the efficacy of placebo going up to beyond what the drugs are, you'll note that manufacturers, scientists, they're all pulling their hairs out. It's getting more and more difficult to do these clinical trials on drugs because placebo's starting to work so damn well.
Yeah, totally. It's it's wild. It's wild. And for me, again, it's just the power of the mind is just so untapped, and there's just a ton of opportunity down that space. So, I mean, sticking with that and just continuing down your journey, like what got you to where you ended up eventually? I mean, eventually you got to the place where staying in apartments like that was no longer a visualization, that was a reality, and you're pretty far from, being poor when you landed in the US. Like, it started to go.
Yeah, totally. So I started going to these raves. And one day we had a formula. We got a formula that worked, took it to the club, Stood up to the biggest drug dealer in the club. This was a guy, tattoos on his face, cool now, not cool in the 80s.
Yeah, so
And
true.
yeah, I
Post
mean,
Malone.
Post Malone. If you have tattoos on your face now, they give you a platinum record. In the
Yeah.
80s, you wouldn't be allowed in a restaurant. You wouldn't
Yeah.
be allowed in public. It would be, you would rarely see a guy like that. But this guy had that, and I walked up to him and somehow managed to have the resilience, the fortitude to get past his objections and get him to say yes. I think the exact words might have been something more along the lines of, if you're fucking with me, I'll kill you. But I took that as yes. He took the entire bag of pills that I had. They were tiny little baggies with goo-filled pills inside because I didn't have enough money to make the machine, to buy the machine for capsulating. So we would roll up the herbs, cook them in an oven, and they make them look like pills in the first generation. But they worked really well. It was just gross to have to eat that much stuff. And it worked. So I got one guy doing it, a big drug dealer. He brought on other drug dealers. So we went from 10 guys to 100 guys to 1,000 guys. They didn't have any supply of real drugs. So the alternative was selling bad stuff, selling nothing, or selling my stuff. I was at the right place at the right time. And we grew the distribution like that. There was a period of my life where I literally had a briefcase, something you don't see anymore these days, filled with pills. And I had a pager. People would page me. I would show up and it'd be $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. I'd be collecting cash all day like a real drug dealer with no risk. What started to happen is a lot of these low-level, medium-level drug dealers started to legitimize their businesses. They started buying distributorships from me. They started to say, hey, man, I want to distribute in Miami. I want to distribute in this place, that place. Yeah. And they started becoming legitimized, kind of like the film The Godfather and Godfather 3, where the goal of La Cosa Nostra, the mafia, was to legitimize their business through mainstream. All these little guys started becoming legitimate distributors. They're buying franchises from me. They were opening up retail stores all across the country. There were stores with my neon sign inside that said herbal ecstasy. And we were keeping these businesses alive. New age bookstores. We were in record stores, Tower Records, Warehouse Records. We were in video stores back when people were watching DVDs and videotapes. We were in those stores. We were in health stores, GNC, General Nutrition Center, 7-Eleven, Urban Outfitters. We were in 30-something thousand stores, which leads me to that story that you said, where I show up at my office. In those days, I would hire anybody who could fog up a mirror just because I couldn't hire quickly enough. I was making this stuff for 25 cents a unit. We were selling it for $20. And as quickly as we could make it, and by this point, I had a manufacturing facility, several, and the pills were being packed in a commercial production line and an FDA-approved facility and all this. We were making millions. And I walked into my office. The news broke that we had made $1 billion in revenue. And I remember thinking to myself, holy shit, I don't even know how much a fucking $1 billion is. I don't know what that means. Literally, I don't know what that means. And Sam Donaldson was outside wanting me to be on Nightline. And I did Nightline. Montel Williams sent us tickets to go to New York to be on his show. 2 Newsweek covers, LA Times, New York Times, London Observer. We were everywhere. And I was still a teenager without a high school education.
Wild, so wild. Yeah, I encourage everyone to pick up the book, because there are just so many stories that even if you would explain them on the show, they're almost not believable in a way. So what happened? I mean, how did you get, where did you go from that place to here you are now?
Yeah, by the way, the book is called Billion, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult. For anybody who's interested, you guys can get it on Amazon, or the first chapter is free on all those places, Spotify and Google Podcasts and whatnot.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link to everything for you.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, we'll include the links in the show notes. So what happened from there? Really good question. Well, the government then started getting involved. Then it seems that the mafia wanted to take over my business. Didn't work out so well for them, but we managed to come
two big institutions.
I don't know which one's worse. I'm going to say the government. The government's probably the one that drove us down. We could at least negotiate with the Yakuza, which was the Japanese mob. And I write that story in my book, how a mysterious man showed up to my office with a duffel bag with $1 million cash and an invitation for a private jet to Tokyo. I had no idea who they were. I get there. Turns out that it was the head of one of the Yakuza families. And unlike what my Japanese partner had told me at the time, they were interested in taking over the entire business. So it became a little bit of a tense moment there. But we got through that. And over time, the government decided that they weren't so happy with what we were doing. And I'll tell you why. In the 1980s, Mark, a pharmaceutical company, which will remain unnamed, came out with a drug that was to fight depression. And everybody was on this. It was one of the SSRIs, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Well, the drug worked well for people, for a lot of people, had one bad side effect. Unfortunately, it led to erectile dysfunction and sexual dysfunction. But don't worry, this same company had a magic blue pill ready to go. Allegedly. All this is allegedly, by the way. Please don't sue me, anybody. But in the 1990s, they had this magic blue pill that they had spent billions of dollars on, ready to go to solve the problem of sexual erectile dysfunction. Only one problem that they did not anticipate with the billions that they spent in putting this stuff out was that a long-haired Iranian kid without a high school education who was sleeping in abandoned apartments sometime before had now created $1 billion in revenue company selling a pill that people were using for that same purpose. Now, that wouldn't
Big problem.
Big problem. Wouldn't have been such a problem if it was regulated. The fact was, supplements, particularly in the United States, were not regulated. So anybody could sell anything as long as it was generally regarded as safe. You'd be able to sell it. And we were taking a big dent out of their plans. So what they did was that they went to the government, they went to the FDA, and they launched a formal complaint, and they lobbied. They had hundreds of millions of dollars that they lobbied against us. And that led to a uphill battle for me. And we would do one thing, create a formula. Quickly, that would be banned. Senate, Congress would pass laws. We would get banned. The FDA would ban it. And then we'd be like, okay, no problem. We've got another ingredient. And they would ban that. So it was a game of cat and mouse for a few years. And eventually I got tired of it. I sold that. And I went into solving the problem of smoking. I figured, hey, this is a problem that's interesting. Curiosity, fascination, what we're talking about. People have been smoking for thousands of years. Here we are in 1999 or whenever that was, and people are still smoking. They're creating smoke, tar, and carbon monoxide to get a small amount of the active elements in a plant substance, which led me to the question, is there a better way? And I started discovering that, yeah, if you were to, as it turns out, heat a plant substance to the point where you could get its active elements out, the cannabinoids, the CBD, the CBG, the CBN, the THC, the nicotine, all those ingredients, if you could extract those out without heating it up to the point where the plant burns, you could enjoy all the good stuff without having any of the bad stuff, the cancer-causing stuff. So I developed and invented one of the first, I think one of the best vaporizers, certainly the first portable digital vaporizer, which became the forerunner to all of the vape technology that you see now. And that company was huge. It was multi-million dollars, and I sold that. It went public. There was a lot of exciting stuff. And from there, I went on to learning about brain supplements, nootropics. You and I talk about personal development a lot. We talk about human performance, human enhancement. And I thought, man, I really, I had a kid at the time. My kid was just born. I thought, I really want to make that limitless pill. That's my next move.
Yeah.
And I came out with this product called Accelerol, which Accelerol, there was another one called Focus Plus, which were these nootropic brain supplements. I was making it at one of these big pharma companies, a little ironic. And it worked really well. It was really expensive, but it worked really well. And I thought to myself, how am I going to sell this? In those days, Bezos wasn't this huge, iconic character, but rather a guy who was fairly accessible. He was a Silicon Valley CEO. Amazon wasn't where it was, and you could get a hold of him. And you'd send an email, jeff@amazon.com, and you'd get a response back in some time. You could call, and sometimes you might be able to get him on the end of a phone back in those days. We heard through the grapevine that Bezos was opening up the Amazon platform to third-party sellers. So I thought to myself, hey, man, that'll be a great way to put this stuff on. I put up the Accelerol, my nootropic pill, and it was $120. Woke up in the morning, didn't think much. I was like, hey, let me see how that did. We sold thousands of units, hundreds of thousands of dollars made in a night, which led me to stop everything I was doing, going, let me take a closer look at this Bezos character. And I realized that this was not a chump. This was a guy who was one of the smartest guys in the room, making big moves, bringing cheap money from Wall Street into Silicon Valley. And he was going to create, and nothing was going to stop him, one of the biggest e-commerce companies, if not the biggest e-commerce company in the world. So I put all my chips down on Amazon. And now what I do is I train and teach people through my FBA seller course how to become an Amazon seller.
Wow. What lights you up every day? I mean, realistically, you don't have to keep doing all of this stuff, right? Like you've probably made enough cash and enough, let's just call it freedom over the years to kind of do what you want. Like what lights you up to wear the Amazon t-shirt as I see you right now?
Great question. I love Amazon. I hate people that are haters, or like, you can find haters in any area where you're successful. And one of the best ways to know if you're successful is if you start to have haters. I wanted to mention that, by the way. I've had people put up websites, all kinds of things. They hate me, trolls, all that kind of stuff. And it's fine. It's okay, because it shows you that you're successful. I love Amazon. I love Jeff Bezos. I think he's one of the big icons of our time. But with that said, what lights me up, to answer your question? I think it's a few things. First, I like doing cool shit, and I like doing it on my own time and on my own terms. I, like you and me talked, I was like, hell yeah, let me do Marc's podcast. I love that. I listen to your stuff. I'm a fan of yours. I'm like, that's fucking awesome. That lights me up. It excites me to have an exchange and to share ideas and to see, hey man, how can we bring each other up through our ideas, through our concepts, through our contacts? You and me have been switching contacts for a minute. And I'm sure we will continue to do so. But how do we raise each other? How do we bring each other up? That excites me. I enjoy family life first and foremost more than anything. I'm a family guy. Love my kid first and foremost. My kid, my wife, my family is the most important thing. So that lights me up. Taking my kid to jujitsu and watching him advance through a level of thinking, watching his head and watching his brain, it's like just a concept that he didn't understand 2 years ago. Now he's getting ready to approach mastery level at that concept. That excites me. Learning excites me. I love to learn about new things. I love to learn about new people. I'm very interested in what makes people tick. And I love the title of your podcast in particular, what's behind the person, right? It's behind the human.
Yeah.
I think that says it all, man, because people wear masks. The public persona of people that you see oftentimes isn't who they really are. And it takes, I think as Alan Watts would say, it takes some energy to break through that mask, that maya, that illusion of what that person is saying. Usually the masks that people put on are bullshit, or they're intended to just serve them. And I noticed this about you through your curiosity and through your question asking. You have the ability to break that ice very quickly. It's a rare talent. I'm not just saying this
thank you.
to compliment you, but very few people can do that. I've got another friend, Ken Rutowski, who runs this organization, Metal International, that we've been talking about. He also has a similar skill like that. And I definitely am going to hook you guys up after the show. But it's that ability to see past people's bullshit, because we all have bullshit, but it's that ability when somebody breaks down or breaks down a little bit and becomes a little bit vulnerable and you get that peek into who this person really is, to understand them. That is the most interesting thing to me. I watch videos all the time. I'm one of these obsessive people where I have a little bit of curiosity, which leads to fascination, which leads to absolute all out obsession. I will get every book on a topic. I will be knee deep in the podcasts, and I will go deep into the people that I'm researching, only to try to find that crack between the worlds, only to try to find where the bullshit ends and the real person begins, because it's in that moment that you find the truth. Bruce Lee used to say, truth is found in combat. And in recent years, I've become a practitioner of many martial arts, but mainly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I'm still a beginner, still learning, loving the journey of learning how to do that. But when you get on the mat with somebody and you start grappling, the thing that is so amazing about that is that all the bullshit goes away. There's no moment where there can be, I want to say presupposition. I don't know what the word is. Help me out here. There can be no illusion.
There's just no loop. Yeah, and no loop. The looping narratives can't exist in that moment.
The looping narratives can't exist in that moment. It's literally how good your skill and your strength are against another person. Doesn't matter what color your belt is, doesn't matter the stories that you tell, you can't front. There's no bullshit in that moment. That's why it's amazing, because in that moment you find the truth. Are you good or are you not? Is that person better than you? Can you learn in that environment?
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I'd love to ask, I mean, just to respect your time, as I'll start wrapping up, but I mean, it seems to me you landed in the US, you landed in an area where you saw, I guess, what was what was possible, right? And you obviously, you and your family were in a different place, but you saw it was possible. Then you started fueling your mind with essentially the tools and the mindset to go and seek that possibility. Nailed it more than most people in the world, for example. And that level of curiosity is still there. I mean, I even noticed in our first couple conversations, just with books and podcasting, asking, well, like, what's working, what's not working, and kind of like what you saw on Amazon, I guess, right? Was, wow, okay, I'm going to pay attention here and go. I'd love to just know, like, what are some consistent practices or rituals or routines that you have right now to help continue to foster that curiosity or keep your mind clear enough so that you can see the signs and where to go, what to follow, and so forth.
Yeah. So I'm 46 now. How old are you, Mark?
37.
Oh man. Okay, cool. It's the gray hair, man.
The gray hair, I was going to say.
I like it. I like it. You have a youthful spirit though, I think. So yeah. So look, when I hit my 40s, I started to think more about physical optimization and mental optimization, because I want to see if there's a way I can actually improve as I age. And I truthfully, I've been going back through my Google Photos and all my images and looking back and asking people honestly, like, was I better then or now? I really think I'm better now. So there's a series of things that I do. But first and foremost, and by the way, in my 20s, when I was running herbal ecstasy and making those hundreds of millions of dollars and all that, I did not take such good care of my health. I was vegan, which I am convinced is not healthy for 99% of the population. People are going to hate me and argue with that. I think there's 1% of the population that it could potentially work for. If you're intelligent, you know how to do it, right? But for the majority of people, I think that, you need to have a better balanced diet. And for me personally, animal protein is one of the greatest things ever invented. With that said, I have a pretty clean diet, in my opinion. I do mainly keto. I have a plant-based diet, paleo keto type thing, not plant-based diets, forgive me, but I do paleo keto with some plants and a good portion of meats. I do mostly nose to tail. So I
Yeah.
have lots of organ meats and that type of thing. When I can't get the organ meat, sometimes they're out. I'll have desiccated organ meat supplements, which I actually enjoy. I feel a huge high from just having liver or organic heart or any of these organ meats. I'm not a massive fan of the taste, but I'm reprogramming my mind to like the taste because I know that it serves my body really well. So I'm doing that. What else do I do? I just got an ice bath. I built one in my backyard. So I do that. I was a big fan of Dave Asprey and all the bulletproof stuff. So
Yeah.
for 4 years, went in to do cryotherapy every single day, minus 230, 240 degrees, 3 minutes. I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a combat sport, a grappling sport, which I'm very excited about and I really enjoy because I think it helps me focus my mind as well as my body. There's some chess-like component to it where it really requires all of your mental and physical energy, and you're constantly learning. No matter how good you get, there's always somebody that's 2, 3, 4, 5 levels above you. So
Yeah.
you're always chasing. And the
Yeah.
dip is very elusive, as Seth Godin's book, The Dip, which I love. I know you're a fan of Seth Godin too. I think I do red light therapy, which I think light is the new drug for the next 10, 20 years. We're going to learn a lot more about light, lasers, red light, blue light, green light, all this type of light technology and how light affects our brain and our bodies.
Yeah.
I think
What do you
that's,
get from that? That's something I haven't tried yet is red light, excuse me, red light therapy.
oh, dude, game changer. Game changer. I don't know all the science about it. I've got
Sure.
people around me who we've been talking about. I've been talking with Dr. Michael Bruce, America's
Okay.
sleep doctor. We just did an episode with him on red light. He's looking into the research on that. And I've got a lot of people around me that are looking into the research, but just anecdotally, I've got these red light panels that I just lay down. I wake up in the morning. Sometimes it's a little dark. I turn the red lights on and it does something to my brain. It does something to my body.
Sure.
It definitely increases blood flow and circulation, which is a big thing. But in some instances, I find it more effective than coffee.
Okay.
Which is
Wow.
not, yeah, which is another thing I'm doing now. I'm 100 days off coffee, which is really
Okay.
interesting. Yeah, I'm using uh, yerba mate,
Yeah.
guayasi, which is a plant from the Amazon that's also got it's caffeine containing, as is yerba mate, and matcha, which we produce a brand called Matcha DNA that you can get on Amazon or wherever you get matcha tea. It's the leading brand of matcha, but I love matcha because matcha is high in this ingredient called L-theanine. And L-theanine is the reason why when you drink tea, that you don't get that nervousness or that edginess that you get from having coffee. And matcha is
Yeah.
highest in L-theanine. So I've been doing that. I've got a ridiculous supplement routine. Do you do
I can
supplements, Mark?
imagine. I mean, I have probably not at your level, but I mean, we were talking about the show sponsor by Optimizer, the magnesium product. I mean, so I take magnesium and probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6 other different things. But the magnesium I noticed right away, almost within days, waking up without that. Sometimes you wake up with that some like borderline anxiety or fear, or like or at least I've had this. Please tell me I'm not the only one, but where you have the looping thoughts. I noticed that was cut right away, and I know magnesium is typically for sleep, but I there's from their research, it seems like there's some pretty good research around just some cognitive benefits as well, and I felt that right away.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I like magnesium. I think so. Andrew Huberman on the Huberman Labs podcast did a deep dive into magnesium. So that might be worth listening
Yeah.
to for you, where he talks about the different types of magnesium that are used. I'm not familiar with BioOptimizer, but I will try it. It sounds
Mhm.
cool. So he talks about that there's different types of magnesium, different forms of magnesium that you use for recovery and different ones for relaxation.
Okay.
I find that CBD is very good for stress and
Yeah.
anxiety. So I've been looking into CBD on Hack and Grow Rich, which is my podcast. We're going to be doing 4 or 5 episodes on CBD and CBN and CBG and all the different new cannabinoids that are relatively THC free. So they're non-psychoactive. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into that. What else do? I do virtual reality meditation app, which is like, it's really meditation for busy executives,
Yeah.
because in 8 minutes, it allows you to get into a flow state. It's something called Trip.
Trip. I was gonna say, is that Trip? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Trip. Oh, do you do it? Do you do
I
Trip?
I don't, but I've chatted with some people from the Trip team in the past.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know them. I know them very well. Great, great people, great company. And their product is really, it's next level. But the reason I use it, I'm a lifelong meditator. There's a great book on this, by the way, called Altered Traits. It's
Okay.
a psychologist that wrote the book on how our brains are impacted and are actually plastic and can change by meditation, can actually physically change our brains. When they scan brains of meditators and they scan brains of people that are not meditators, the brains are notably different with people who meditate and better.
Yeah.
So I use that when I don't have time, because that's one of my biggest problems. For me to get myself into a flow state, into a trance state, could take 21 to 24 minutes. It's just like that for me. I got to sit
Yeah.
down. I got to watch some stupid YouTube videos or listen to some prank calls or just do something so far out of left field, so my brain just drops off. Then I put that away. Then I'll sit and I'll meditate. Once my brain is quieted a little bit, my mind is quieted, and it'll take me 21 to 24 minutes with this app, Trip. If anybody wants to, also, I'm happy to share a code about that. If you guys reach out to me on my website, I can introduce you guys to this too. But it allows you to get into that flow state in minutes. In like 8 minutes, you're
That's
there,
impressive. Yeah.
in and out, which is awesome. And it's got a tracking thing in there where it's like, so it measures how you're feeling before, and it gives you a little rating, like, how are you feeling? How's your mood? Whatever. And at the end, it asks you those same questions. And I'm always like up 40%, up 70, like
Yeah.
your mood change 70%. So
That's awesome.
yeah, that's pretty awesome. Cold, extreme heat. Basically just staying outside of my comfort zone and seeking discomfort, like seeing how far I can actually push my body without breaking, and finding a balance. And then similarly, just having days off where I can do whatever I want. And it's funny, Mark, my wife jokes with me about this, because we read about people having cheat days. Do you know about
Yeah.
this whole philosophy of cheat days?
Well, like I know that with diet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
With diet. And my cheat day is like having a paleo pasta or like a paleo pizza. It's like, I've got buddies that are like bodybuilders or fighters or whatever, and they have a cheat day and they're having pizza and M&Ms and like crazy shit. And I'm like, that doesn't sound good to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
My cheat day is going to Whole Foods and getting like some organic steak with some organic potatoes, and that's my cheat day. But
Yeah. Well, I mean that lights you up, and but I mean you've worked obviously hard to get to that point or in that mentality, right? I mean, and everyone can get everyone will be lit up by different things, but I guess the point being, I mean, the more you work on yourself, your mind, your body, your spirit, all of that, I mean, you keep raising your baseline essentially,
yeah,
right? So I mean, you're proving that point, and I mean, for anyone that's watching this, I mean, you look pretty damn healthy. You look good. You seem happy. So that's great. I mean, keep doing what you're doing, right?
yeah, likewise. Yeah, totally, man. If it works for you, then that's what you should do.
Yeah. Well, man, this was fun. I mean, we could definitely continue for hours. I can see that. We'll have to do some follow-up chats as time goes. But for everyone listening, I highly encourage the book Billion. I'll put everything in the show notes. I mean, there's just so many fascinating stories, a lot of learnings, things that'll, help you pause and think. And my kind of obsession, just taking what you're reading and digesting the stories, but then applying it to where you're at in your life, right? Like that's when it becomes really powerful stuff. And there's
Yeah.
so much you can do from that book. And yeah, and just stay in touch, shoot some messages back and forth. And I'm excited to see what's next. I was about to say I'm excited to see what you jump into next, but it'll probably be too late because you're already ahead of that curve. If I see you doing something, I'm like, damn, too late.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I oftentimes, especially like with my Amazon course, I teach that there's no money in innovation. It's one of the greatest secrets, I think, of I know we're closing out, but I think it's one of the greatest secrets of wealthy people, successful people, is that you don't want to be the first guy to do something. So I've
Sure.
a lot of times in my life been an innovator, and the problem with that is that you have to bear the cost of education. You have to bear the cost of telling people why they need a freaking thing or why it's important, and that's
Yeah.
very expensive. Much easier, and I learned this from herbal ecstasy, much easier to find a market, find what they need, and just feed that market what they need. Such a quicker path to wealth.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess the rephrase for me is, I mean, you're finding the sweet spots. The market was there, but you innovated on how to jump into that market or provide a brand new product, essentially, right? But it's finding that sweet spot that, yeah, you're not the one creating the market, essentially. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for showing up with energy. This was fun. And like I said, hope we do this again.
Appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for having me on, man.
All right.